The Crossroads by L. Ron Hubbard. It was not like Eben Smith to resign himself to the fates and vagaries of an economic muddle he could not fathom.
It ain't right,
He said that dawn to Maria, his wife, and Lucy, his horse.
Now, I can grow crops, and I know crops, and there ain't nobody in Jefferson County that can grow more corn per acre, and what's more better, corn per stalk than me. And when it comes to turnips and squash and leaf lettuce, I reckon I ain't so far behind. And by cracky, there must be some place where the stuff can be sold so folks can eat.
The government paid you right smart for all that plowing under you did, Eben.
Well, I reckon I don't give a spit how smart they paid me because it all went out in taxes so they could pay me again. No, sir, Maria.
And here he had to pause and grunt while he made Lucy take the bit.
It ain't right. Now, them city papers, when they ain't a-talking about some foreigner fighting some other foreigner, is saying how people is starving in the streets, well, I can't figure it out. Here I am, the best corn raiser in Jefferson County, and I got lots of corn and squash and turnips and leaf lettuce too. By gum, and still the government says I got to stop raising what I planted and plow under what I was going to plant. Huh, it's like that government man said yesterday when I asked him what the ding dong it was all about. The economic problems is acute. And by golly, our economic problems is going to get even more acute if we don't get some hams and things for this winter. Well, like my grandfather Boswell that traded a spavined mare for the purtiest prize bull in Ohio used to say, politics is a subject for men that got full bellies. Otherwise, it ain't politics, it's war. Well, we ain't no paupers that we got to be supported by no charity. And if them folks starving in the city, why, I reckon they got something or other to trade for turnips and truck.
Now, Eben, don't you go doing nothing to get the government mad with you. Maybe this thing you're going to do ain't got any place in this here economic system of cuteness.
Well, never did hear anything wrong with a man filling his belly, so long as he didn't have to steal to do it,
said Eben, picking up the lines and trailing them to the box seat of the spring wagon. Maybe them city folks will trade you right out and everything, and you'll have to walk home.
Listen at that woman,
said the offended Eben to Lucy the mare.
Maria, I reckon as how you're forgetting that time I swapped out a belt buckle for one of them newfangled double-action hand lever self-draining washing machines for you. Giddy up, Lucy.
The heavily sagging wagon finally decided to follow along on the hoofs of Lucy, and while Maria held open the gate, Eben looked like a simile for determination. His lean, wind-burned, plow-hardened, tobacco-stained, overalled, shrewd-eyed self might have served as a model for a modern painter in the need of a typical New Englander type peculiar to the Middle West. But Eben was not quite as sure as he appeared. What Maria had said about the city folks had shaken him. Dag-nab women anyhow, always making a man feel uncertain of hisself. Wasn't he Vermont stock? Hadn't his folks in Vermont, England, China, and Iowa, to say nothing of the Fiji Isles and Ohio, bargained and businessed everybody in sight out of their shirts? Yankee traders or the direct descendants of them were just plain impossible to trim unless it was by each other. Still, he'd never been away from this expanse of green and yellow prairie, and no matter his own folks, he wasn't sure. Maybe them stores in the city wasn't as easy to deal with as Jeb Hawkins down at Corn Center. He looked with misgivings at his wagon load. Under the tarp were turnips and lettuce and corn and some early apples, making the canvas cover bulge. They were tangibles. With his own hands he had brought them into strength in this world, and by golly, there weren't turnips or lettuce or corn like that anywhere else in Jefferson County. Plow them under? If folks was starving, then by golly they needed food. That was simple. And if they had anything at all, Eben knew he could bring whatever it was back and trade it to Johnny Bach or Jim Johnson or George Thompson. They had hams and a lot of other truck Eben needed. Surely it was a simple transaction. Because he lived down at the south end of Jefferson County and had always traveled north to Corn Center, he was not sure of his road, nor, indeed, sure of his destination. People spoke of the city and pointed south, and that was little enough to go upon. Twice he paused and asked directions, getting vague replies, and drove on. Dusk came, and then darkness, and Eben, disliking to stop because he might yet see the city in the distance, continued onward. When the stars said it was about 8, and when Eben was about to give up for the night, he came to a crossroads.
Whoa!
Here, 4 roads made an intersection, and so irregular was their departure from this spot, and so widely different was their quality, that Eben was very perplexed. One road was concrete, or at least white and hard. The road to the right of that, going away from Eben, was full of large green-gray boulders and seemed nearly impossible to anything except foot traffic. The next was hard and shiny and metallic and threw back the stars, so that at first Eben thought it was wet. Then, of course, there was his own. Then an oddity struck Eben. For the past few minutes that he had been on this intersection, the sun had been at high noon. He put his thumb in his eye and peered at it accusingly, and then, because it was quite definitely the sun, and obviously there, he shook his head and muttered,
Never can tell what the gold-darned government is going to do next.
Methodically, then, he took up the problem of the roads. One of these must lead to the city, but with 4 from which to choose, he rapidly became groggy with indecision. He sat down in the wagon's shadow and waited for somebody to come along with information. The hours drifted by, though the sun did not move, and Eben was nearly upon the point of continuing along his own dirt track when he saw something moving among the rocks up the hill. He got up and hailed, and the something moved cautiously down toward him from boulder to boulder. The newcomer was a bearded old fellow in a greasy brown robe, which was his only covering. Bits of tallow and sod clung in his gray whiskers, and a hunted look lurked in his watery eyes.
Long live the Messiah!
What Messiah?
Long live Biles the Messiah!
Never heard of him.
The old man stared in amazement, and then slowly began to examine Eben from toe to straw hat, shaking his head doubtfully.
You aren't like anyone I ever saw before. From whence dost thou come?
Jefferson County.
It must be far, far away. I have never heard of it. Are you telling the truth when you say you have never heard of Biles the Messiah?
Yep. And what's more, I don't reckon I care whether I hear about him or not. I want to know which road to take to get to the city.
The old man looked around.
I've never been along any of these roads. In fact, I don't remember this crossroad at all, no matter how many times I have come down this hill. And as for a city, why, I know only of Gloryville and Hallelujah. One behind me and one before me on this road I travel.
Never heard of either of them. But I got to find out which one goes to the city, because I've got a load of vegetables here that I aim to trade to the city folk.
Vegetables? At this time of the year?
Oh, why not? It's September, ain't it?
September? Why, thou must be mad. This is January.
Oh, that ain't finding the way to the city.
Wait, see here. You say you have vegetables? Let me see them.
Eben lifted the edge of the canvas, and the old man began to gloat, and his jaws to slaver. He picked up a turnip and marveled over it. He caressed a leaf of lettuce. He stroked the rosy skin of an apple, and when he picked up a beautiful ear of corn, he cooed. Eben was a trader. His eye became shrewd, and his pose indolent.
Well, I reckon the wagon's pretty heavy anyway. if maybe you got something or other to trade, I might let you have something. Of course, vegetables in January is it's pretty scarce, and the city folks will be willing to pay a right smart amount. But maybe now you got something valuable that might persuade me to trade. Well, I ain't saying I will, but I ain't saying I won't.
Wait here!
Cried the old man and bounded up the hill as though mounted on springs. Eben waited for an hour with patience, pondering what article the old man might produce for trade. It was certain he couldn't have much, for he seemed very thin and poor. There was a tinkling of donkey bells, and in a moment 6 men leading beasts of burden came into sight and down the hill. The men brought the animals to a halt and unloaded from them with ceremony 2 big jugs abeast.
Now, these for your wagon load of vegetables.
Eben looked dubious. He plucked a shoot of grass and chewed it.
Well, can't say as I'm much enthused.
Not enthused? Why, by the saints, my good fellow, these jars be full of the famous Glory Monastery brandy.
Well, reckon I ain't got no license to sell liquor.
But it's all we have, and we are starved for good food. The peasants have to spend so much time praying during the summer that they hardly get a chance to plant, and so we have to make them fast all winter. Only this brandy, made from grapes grown on our own slopes, is in abundance. It's Byl's favorite brandy, and that's why we make so much of it.
Nope.
But just taste it.
Don't drink. Reckon I better be getting on to the city.
Please don't leave. Carlos, run back and bring up 12 donkey loads of brandy.
Carlos and the others hurried away, and Eben philosophically chewed his shoot of grass until they came back, and the additional 24 jars were unloaded.
Now, will you trade?
It came to Eben that many of his vegetables might possibly spoil if he kept them until he reached the city, and of course he might be able to do something about the brandy.
Well, might give you a few things. This brandy is pretty cheap in the city.
How much will you give us?
Well, maybe a quarter of the load. After all, you only got 36 jars here, and they hold maybe not more than 5 gallons apiece, and, well, that's about 180 gallons of brandy. Yep, I can let you have a quarter of the load, providing you let me do the selecting.
They agreed, and presently the mules were laden with turnips and corn and leaf lettuce and apples, and the wagon was lighter by a quarter. Eben watched them pick their way among the rocks, up the hill and out of sight. He then began to lift the brandy off the road and into the wagon, but he very soon found, to the tune of a snapping spring, that he had made far too good a trade. Scowling, he started to walk up the hill to see if he could find a sapling with which to mend his wagon. But he did not get far from the wagon before the thump of marching feet brought him hurrying back. 16 soldiers, with an officer, were coming along the dusty white road. Eben was not familiar with the dull gray of their uniforms, but he suspected that maybe the government had changed the color since he'd last seen army men. The officer stared at Eben, then at the wagon, then at Lucy, and back to the wagon. Finally, his eye lingered upon the jars.
Who are you, and what are you doing here?
Well, I'm Eben Smith, and I reckon the government would be plumb put out if anything was to happen to me.
Put out? My man! I suppose you do not realize that a totalitarian state is far too powerful to be overthrown. You have seen what happens to the enemies of the great dictatorship. What do you have there?
Brandy.
What?
Brandy and vegetables.
And what, may I ask, is brandy?
You drink it.
I must inspect this.
Eben got a water bucket out of his wagon and poured a couple gallons of brandy into it. He handed the bucket to the officer, who drank thirstily. It surprised Eben that the fellow did not choke or gasp, and then he realized that this brandy must be of a very smooth quality indeed. The officer handed the bucket on to his men. It was soon empty.
Fill it up.
About half an hour later, the officer and the soldiers were sitting in a semicircle around the tail of the wagon, telling one another they were all the best of friends.
Fill it up once more.
Eben filled up the bucket, but he did not present it.
Oh, who is going to pay for this? Brandy is very expensive.
Charge it to the state.
And then thought better of it and reached into his pocket, bringing out a roll of paper. He tendered a bill.
That's plenty to pay for it. Now, give me the bucket.
This must be Confederate money, like my grandfather Boswell used to talk about. Well, it won't pay for the brandy.
Sergeant, arrest this man for treason.
But when the sergeant got up, he promptly fell flat on his ugly face, and when the soldiers got up, they fell down.
Maybe you could take something else for the payment.
Eben had been wishing for some time that he was not there all alone at the mercies of these soldiers, and now he looked at them shrewdly.
Well, I reckon maybe I might take a few rifles.
What?
Well, this brandy is pretty expensive, and if you don't pay me for it and leave me alone, why, I don't guess I'll be able to get any more of it for you. Maybe I can trade some of these rifles to Jeb Hawkins for rabbit hunting.
Can't do it.
No more brandy.
3 hours later, the last soldier had wobbled away, and 16 rifles, 16 bullet bandoliers, 1 automatic, and 5 clips lay under the canvas along with the vegetables. Eben was certain now that he would not abandon so much as a drop of the remaining 170 gallons of brandy. He was just about to explore the metal road when something was seen to be moving along it. Eben went back to his wagon and waited. It was the strangest kind of vehicle he had ever seen, for it had no wheels. It was just a big, gleaming box which scudded along the surface without a sound. There was something frightening about it. When it came abreast of the wagon, it stopped, and a section of it clanked outward. A thing which was possibly a man leaned out, staring at Eben. Its head was nearly as big as its body, and it had 2 antennae waving above its brow, as well as its huge pupilless eyes.
Must have escaped from some carnival.
Tuda besti, nustard habadif udif, iswordif kusta banarde?
I reckon you must be some foreigner. I don't understand you.
Erdif hergerd bajurgerd, verjurgerd katifti?
Can't you talk English?
The driver got out. His spindly legs did not lift him to a height in excess of Eben's shirt pocket. He began to rummage around inside the cab of the wheelless vehicle and finally produced some sort of instrument. This he plugged into a hole in the side of the vehicle and then aimed a sort of megaphone at Eben.
Erdurft, herdurfti, berjurfta gajurfta, gataifsif, objavati?
That's a funny looking outfit you got there. But shucks, I've seen a lot of radios that was better. The thing don't even play.
The driver twiddled the dials while Eben spoke and then, much mystified, left off.
Versifaturti, ferdafate.
Don't do no good. I can't understand a word of it.
On that, the driver beamed. He tuned 1 dial sharply.
Then you speak elementary English?
Of course I do. And if you do too, why didn't you do this so in the first place?
I think you will not be insulted if I do. But usually, you know, it is considered vulgar to talk plain English. Tell me, can't you really encipher?
Don't reckon I ever caught myself doing it.
The driver walked around Eben, examining him.
In our language schools, you know, we encipher and decipher as we speak. It is grammatically correct. But you seem to be from some very distant land where plain English is still spoken. It must be a very dull place.
I reckon we get along. Hey, what you got in that thing there?
The truck? Oh, some junk. I was taking it down to the city dump. What have you got in that thing?
Well, I got some brandy and I got some vegetables, but they're both pretty valuable.
Brandy? Vegetables? I don't know those two words.
Eben chuckled to himself, and this feller was accusing him of being ignorant.
Well, I'll show you.
He gave the fellow an apple, and the driver immediately pulled a small lens of a peculiar color from his pocket and looked it all over.
It's to eat.
Eat?
Sure.
More anxiously than before, the driver remade his examination.
Well, there's no poison in it.
And then he bit it with his puny teeth and presently smiled.
Why? That is very good indeed. Herta.
No, don't start that again.
It's excellent. Do you have many more of these?
No, they're pretty rare.
What is that in the jars?
Eben gave him a drink of the brandy, and again the driver beamed.
How this warms one. It's marvelous. Could I buy some from you?
And he took out a card which had holes punched in it.
Well, what's this?
That's a labor card, of course. It shows my value. Of course, as the driver of a waste wagon, I don't earn very much. Only 40 labor units a week, but it should be sufficient.
Well, what kind of junk you have got in that wagon?
What does it have to do with my buying of some of this?
Maybe we can cook up a trade.
Trade? What is trade?
Well, you got something I might want, and I got something you might want, and so we swap. I give you what I got, and you give me what you got. And there you are.
How quaint. Never heard of such a thing. But I haven't anything in my truck that you could want.
Never can tell.
The driver lifted up the top of the box vehicle, and Eben, peering in, very nearly fell in. The whole load was gold bracelets and necklaces and diamond and ruby rings. Eben could not trust his speech for a little while, and then, casually,
That looks like gold.
Yes, of course.
Real gold?
Certainly.
Reckon. You figure this ain't much account.
Well, since transmutation factories lowered the price on gold to 3 units a ton, nobody wants to wear it. And the street department has to clean up the back of the women's distribution center. And so I'm taking it down to the city dump, of course. It is much easier to make sand into gold than to remelt the gold.
Then I reckon this load is worth 3 a ton, maybe $16. I tell you what I'll do. I'll give you a basket of apples and a jar of brandy for the lot.
the driver looked at Eben in astonishment, and then, before the man could change his mind, leaped into the truck and backed it swiftly to eject the load of jewelry beside the spring wagon. Sweatingly, he then lifted the 5-gallon jar of brandy and the basket of apples into his cab and went scudding back from whence he had come without another word. Eben picked up pieces of jewelry at random and bit them, leaving clear teeth dents in them. It most certainly was gold. Immediately upon that, he became more uncomfortable. Supposing somebody came along and stole it? Hurriedly, he began to carry it behind a bush and bury it, and as he worked, another alarming thought came to him. People would think he'd stolen it. He should have gotten a bill of sale. Forlornly, he finished hiding it. Why, they'd send him to jail for years and years. They'd say he'd gone and robbed somebody. And then came the final blow. The government said it was against the law to have gold. He'd broken the law, and they'd put him away for years and years.
Hello?
He leaped about to find that his preoccupation had let 4 men in uniform come up the chalky road unnoticed. They had a very severe appearance.
A little while ago,
Said the spokesman, a young man.
a friend of ours came along here and got something from you.
Was it my fault?
No. You don't understand. He and his soldiers came back singing and walking in circles and muttering about a wonderful drink. Well, we became curious, naturally, as to what made them so happy.
Well, I guess it won't do no harm. It was brandy. There's some of it in the water bucket.
The spokesman drank and smacked his lips. He passed the bucket to his companions, and they drank ecstatically, handing the empty bucket back for replenishment.
Nope.
Sir, we are officers of the Hurricane Guard of the dictator himself.
Well, that don't make no difference. If you want brandy, you got to trade me for something for it.
They studied him for a while, and then went into conference among themselves. Then they again consulted Eben.
We will buy your brandy. How much do you want for it?
No, money's no good. It's got to be a swap.
They again went into a huddle, and then the spokesman said,
We haven't anything to swap you except guns. There aren't anything but guns in our whole country because we conquered everybody there. There was nothing left to produce except guns.
Well, guns ain't worth much.
But you'll take them?
Well,
The 4 officers were gone in a flurry of chalk dust. Eben sat down on a boulder beside his wagon. The gold worried him, and these officers worried him, for he could not quite understand why they really would trade. If they had guns, it seemed more likely that they used them to take what they wanted. Perhaps, though, they didn't want to disclose the source of the brandy or cut off its supply. Still, if they found this gold, they wouldn't bargain about that. They'd just take it without so much as giving him a blessing. It grieved him that he had to abandon it. It was so pretty. The most he could take would be some necklaces and bracelets for Maria. While so engaged, he was again accosted, and at the sound of the hail, he turned to find the soldiers coming back. He had said guns, and now, it seemed, he was getting guns. In a long procession, he saw soldiers dragging at wheeled machine guns and ammunition carts and light anti-tank rifles and their caissons. The young officer who had made the bargain was evidently a businessman beneath his rank stripes.
Sir, we are bringing you guns. All these guns for all that brandy. We offer the trade, and if you refuse it, we offer you guns in another way.
Eben stared at the arsenal which was mounting up beside his wagon, towering and then towering again until the pyramid was spilling arms into the road. He wanted to say no, but the sign of this force got the better of his judgment. He made no protest when the brandy was carted away, all 170 gallons of it, leaving Eben with enough materials for a good-sized war. He tried to be hopeful, but he was certain the longer he sat looking at that pile of weapons that he had been bested. What good were machine guns against rabbits? And there are only rabbits in Jefferson County. Being a Yankee, his mechanical spirit was stirred by the mystery of it. The thing was so complicated that it challenged his ingenuity. He finally found how to pull back the loading handle, and then, going from there, figured out the way to put a belt through the loading slot. The result far exceeded his expectations. With a shattering roar, bullets flung out from the weapon and carved a long trench in the hill. So engrossed did he become that he was startled when the old man from the Glory Monastery put a hand on his shoulder.
Oh, hello?
The old man was staring in fascination at the machine gun.
What manner of instrument is that?
It's a machine gun.
The old man looked at the mighty pile of them.
But you have so many.
Enough to start a war.
War?
Well, that's what they use these for.
And wishing to show off his newly acquired skill, he sent a ferocious burst into the hill. Rocks and dust flew violently.
Do they all act like that?
Yep.
and he showed him how to load and fire it. The old man got up from the tripod shaking, but evidently not from fear.
You wait here.
And then, with beard and cassock flowing behind, streamed up the hill and out of sight. He was gone for nearly 2 hours, and Eben began to think that he had been scared away and was just beginning to swear at himself for not having traded off some more vegetables when the old man came streaming back, followed closely by several monks.
Now, do that again.
What?
Shoot that thing.
Eben loaded and fired it, and the newcomers, as they watched the dirt fly out of the hill.
Are they all alike?
Well, some of them are bigger.
Let's see how they work.
Eben wheeled out an anti-tank rifle and, after thinking it over for a few minutes, got it loaded and fired. The shell blew a great gouge from the hill and lifted a boulder 10 feet in the air.
You see?
Said the old man to his friends. We see.
And?
You're right.
Bring the donkeys!
At a signal, nearly 100 donkeys came tinkling over the hill, each one loaded with 2 5-gallon jugs of brandy.
Now, wait a minute. You want to trade that for these guns?
Certainly. We are sick of shouting, "Long live Biles," from morning until night. Besides, we don't think he's the Messiah. We're almost certain that I am.
Well,
Chewing thoughtfully on a shoot of grass.
well, these here machine guns and cannons come pretty high. Now, you got just about enough there to buy 3 of them.
3?
Well, the ammunition, of course, is extra.
The old man looked at the guns and then at the long line of donkeys. He sighed. Then, glancing at the gouged hill, brightened.
All right. Men, unload and go back for more.
Some 4 hours later, there were no more guns anywhere in sight, but nearly a half-acre of ground was covered by stone jars. Eben walked thoughtfully between the wide rows, lifting a cover here and there and smelling the stuff. It was better, far better to have brandy, though he did not know exactly why. It was something tangible, and unlike guns or gold, was not likely to get him into trouble. Of course, he would have to figure out a way to transport all this and a way to sell it. With a swoosh, the rectangular box slid to a halt beside the spring wagon. Lucy looked inquiringly at it and then went on champing her grass.
Erturba Ertadati.
Hello?
Came back about those apples.
Yep.
I brought another truckload of gold for a basket of them.
Nope.
You mean you won't trade like you did?
Nope.
Say, you can't do that. Why, I sold those apples for a labor unit apiece, and I've got buyers until I can't count them. You can't refuse.
Nope. No trade.
Not even one basket? Not just one? This is much better gold. I got it off the dump north of town. It's in bars.
Nope.
You don't have to give me one of those. That made everybody sick. So you are getting a better bargain than ever. Only half of what you gave me before. And twice as much gold in weight.
Nope.
The antennae waved in disgust, and the driver leaped into the other end of his wheelless truck and swooshed away from there without even saying goodbye. Eben sighed deeply. It pained him to have to refuse such a trade. But if the government said that having gold was against the law, then it was against the law. He'd already put his neck in the noose for having a couple tons of it. There was a steady tramp nearby, and Eben whirled to see that the white road was thick with soldiers and guns. They were marching without regard to order, and each one was eagerly towing some sort of weapon, and some had among them a big piece of artillery and its caissons. The air was thick with dust of their coming, and the road about Eben was thick with clamoring men.
We want some of that stuff.
said a junior officer, thrusting a submachine gun at Eben. He had evidently already had a drink from his luckier mates, just enough to stimulate his desire for more.
Nope, that brandy.
We offer a trade, and if we don't get what we came for, then we'll take it anyway. We are the regimental guard of Lamano the Lurid himself, and what we do, and what we do, and what we want. Now, is it a trade?
Eben sat down dejectedly and watched his brandy vanish jar by jar up the long chalk road. And sometime later, he dolorously inspected a park of miscellaneous weapons and ammunition. Business was not so good, he decided, for it was not likely that there could be much more brandy at the Glory Monastery. Well, he still had his vegetables and 10 baskets of apples. Maybe he'd better get out of here while he possessed that much negotiable capital. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Truck after wheelless truck came to a stop on the metal road, and driver after driver, big-headed and spindle-legged, jumped out to surround Eben.
Now, do we trade or don't we trade? This is my union, and in each of these trucks is a full load of gold.
I reckon I have to be sorry, but...
There was a whir and a crackle as of a leaping arc, and the world grew dim for Eben. He caught at his wagon and slumped down, wholly unconscious. It was, of course, still high noon when he woke up. The trucks were gone. The vegetables and apples were gone. Eben sighed, staring into the empty spring wagon. He was thankful to at least show no mark of what they had done to him, save a slight headache. The robbers. And then he turned and saw that in some places, in some 20 paces at the rate of 2 tons or more, a place the trucks had dumped their contents. Gold, 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 and more gold.
Oh.
There must be 40 or 50 tons of it. Gold, gold, gold.
Hello!
Eben nodded wearily to the old man, and then, noticing that he was powder-stained and high with excitement, took interest.
More guns! He's got the United Order of Fanatics against us. We've got to have more guns and more ammunition.
Eben waved a tired hand toward the wide park of guns.
Ah! And as for the trade, our credit will have to be good. We have brandy, but no time to transport it.
Have brandy in hand, or no guns.
There was a shattering roar up on the hill, and Eben ducked from the swarm of singing slugs which barely missed his head.
Is our credit good?
Sure.
And then the park was emptied by 100 toiling, battle-stained monks, and Eben's capital went rolling over the boulders and out of sight up the hill. He sank down upon a boulder. His capital was gone, save for this accursed gold. And if the government found all this gold around him, they'd put him away for years, if not as a thief, then at least as a hoarder. Life became bitter to Eben. It could not be worse. He had better abandon the wagon and ride Lucy back home. He had made his decision and was in the act of whistling for Lucy when he saw a knot of men come hurrying down the chalk road toward him. They stopped, threw themselves down, and fired with their rifles at something Eben could not see. Then they leaped up and sped swiftly toward him. A gray-headed, corpse-faced giant was in the lead. His muchly braided uniform was torn, and his hat was gone, and his sword scabbard was empty. He almost rushed by Eben and then came to an abrupt halt, glaring. The few soldiers with him clustered about.
Is this the devil?
Probably.
Said a soldier.
Did you or did you not sell brandy to my bodyguard in return for their guns?
Well...
So it's true that I, Lamano the Lurid, am revolted against because of you, you miserable lout. Gotcha? Shoot the man.
Your dictatorship. There isn't much time. The people are are hard on their heels.
Shoot him. He cost me my realms.
But just as Kolcha raised his rifle, there was a burst of firing from down the chalk road, and the soldiers dropped down and fired swiftly back, driving their pursuers to cover. Then once more, Kolcha started to do his duty.
You, the traitor!
And Eben was almost happy to see the old man and an armed bodyguard come rushing down the hill.
What's this?
Then the chalk road's distance belched more bullets, and Lomano and his troops decided they had tarried too long. A moment later, a stream of indifferently armed peasants loped up the chalk road and rounded the chalk cliff in pursuit of Lomano. Eben sighed with relief and was ready to express his thanks to the old man when that worthy came up panting and glaring.
You, the traitor! Have you any more guns?
No, but if you pay me what you owe me, I can possibly get you as many more as you want.
Ha! I thought so. What use have I for guns now that I have won? And you would sell them to another who would oppose me. Sir, you find before you the Messiah, and you who threaten my existence must be disposed of here and now.
Hey, you owe me money. You took my guns and you owe me
Sir,
money.
if you have any last prayers, say them.
Wait a minute. You can't do this. Why, if you say you don't want me to sell guns, then just pay me what you owe me and I'll be on my way and never come back here.
Sir, this cannot be. I, the Messiah after Biles, God rest his soul, command that this menace to my rule be removed.
Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 3 wheelless cars, not dissimilar to the trucks, save that they had windows instead of blank sides, rushed up to a halt on the metal road. Out of them poured a swarm of big-eyed men with antennae. The new Messiah gaped at the weird beings, and his men, in alarm, fell back. The beings swarmed around Eben, and the Messiah took to his heels with his crew.
For the Heast Mag.
Said an officer to the driver Eben had first seen.
Freistest.
The officer fished into his metal shirt and pulled out a sheet with dots on it. He looked at Eben and then at the paper.
I understand you speak vulgar English. Therefore, I shall decipher this order as I go. Attend. Whereas the strange being at the crossroads delivered into the hands of one carted various articles to be known as Histerfa and Farst. Whereas one carted did disseminate to the populace of Fuega and Histafa and Farst, and whereas the populace of Fiorgag does now clamor for fresh and bulky food against the wise counsel of the Guantferf Pierestra, that food pills are far superior, thus upsetting the public order. It is hereby discovered that there has been a sag in the time tracks and that appropriate steps must be taken to rectify the error. Signed, Hasked.
Thereupon, the workmen, with magnetic slings, whisked blasters out of their cars and made holes. After this, they produced a dozen weighty hydraulic jacks, which soon had their heads thrusting against the boulder-strewn road. Up, up, up went the road, and then abruptly vanished. Next, they attacked the problem of the chalk road, working efficiently and without a sound. Up, up, up went the chalk road and then faded into nothingness. The jacks were shifted and more holes blasted, and then the workmen had purchase on the metal road, and with them on it, it began to rise, up, up, up. Eben leaped for the edge and landed with a jar upon his own world's dirt track. Overhead, the metal strip continued to lift, and then, with a puff, it was no longer to be seen. He sat for a while looking upward, and then, with a shake of his head which designated complete abandonment of the whole thing, he went over to where Lucy had been standing and picked up the diamond ring and 2 ruby bracelets which had fallen out of the bottom of the hole in which he had buried them. The next morning, Eben drove into his yard. "Mercy sakes! Oh, Eben!" And she raced to him as he was getting down and threw her arms about him, beginning to cry. He pried her off, not ungently.
Here, now, no need to cry. I got home, didn't I?
Oh, Eben, I'm so glad to see you. 5 whole months and no word from you.
5 months?
Yes, 5 months. Oh, Eben, I thought you were dead. Eben looked about and saw for the first time that the fresh green of spring and not the dying green of fall was in the fields.
Good gosh! And without any plowing done?
I just knew something dreadful was going to happen when you left. What did happen?
Well, I traded off my vegetables.
He put the ring and the bracelets in her hand.
These are for you. Now give me some dinner and let me get at this plowing. Good gosh! March and no plowing done?